Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Velandia, and welcome to a new episode of Voices of History, a segment in which we give the floor to national and international experts to develop into the key moment in our history, analyze their impact, and discover details that often go unnoticed. Today we travel to the South Africa, where 1880, the first Anglo-Boer War broke out, a brief but decisive conflict, and the powerful British Empire sought to expand its control, while the Boers descended Dutch settlers fought to maintain their independence in Transvaal. In a few months, this war would prove that even an empire could be challenged. So, to guide us to this journey, we have an honor to have a special guest. Now, I would like to begin by introducing the organized this segment, David de Caizal, a military historian, director of the Security and Defense Area at INISEG, director of the research group at the International Center for Advanced Research in Security and Defense at INISEG, member in support at the Association of the United States Army, advisory member of the Military Law and Security section of the Madrid Bar Association, member of the INISEG Research Group and the University and Agency Partnership Program, a university project for the dissemination of the U.S. defense culture, member of the Association of Historians of Catalonia. So, David, welcome, and you have the floor. David, te cedo la palabra.
Gracias. Bien, para entrar en detalle histórico de esta nueva grabación de Voces de la Historia que tenemos para hoy, vamos a hacer una pequeña introducción histórica para luego dar paso a nuestro ponente que nos hable más ampliamente sobre la Primera Guerra Anglo-Bóer de 1880-81. En el contexto histórico en el que vamos a entrar en esta grabación, recordemos que los Boers, los colonos de origen neerlandés, francés y alemán, habían fundado repúblicas independientes en el sur de África, como el Transvaal y el Estado Libre de Orange. En 1877 aproximadamente el Imperio británico anexó ese territorio del Transvaal, alegando incapacidad Boer para poder defenderse de los pueblos africanos y sobre todo también por interés en controlar rutas estratégicas hacia el interior. Este, evidentemente, pues, generó un descontento entre los Boers que valoraban mucho su independencia. En cuanto al desarrollo del conflicto, en diciembre de 1880, pues los Boers se levantan en armas contra los británicos y proclaman la restauración de la República Sudafricana, el Transvaal. En este caso, los Boers, expertos en guerra de guerrillas y también, evidentemente, con una gran movilidad a caballo, infligieron varias derrotas muy importantes a las fuerzas británicas. Como batallas clave tenemos tres. Lames Nek, en enero de 1881, con una derrota británica al intentar romper las defensas Boers. En Ingongo, en febrero de 1881, otra derrota británica, muy a destacar, y la de Majuba Hill, el 27 de febrero de 1881, con una decisiva victoria Boer, donde las tropas británicas fueron desbordadas. Como consecuencias, el gobierno británico, pues, evidentemente liderado por el primer ministro Gladstone, va a decidir no prolongar la guerra, pues el costo evidentemente era muy alto y la opinión pública bastante desfavorable al conflicto. Tenemos la Convención de Pretoria en 1881, donde los Boers recuperan la autonomía interna del Transvaal. El Reino Unido va a mantener una cierta soberanía nominal, especialmente en política exterior. Y esta paz pues, va a dejar tensiones sin resolver, que más tarde pues, van a desembocar en la Segunda Guerra Anglo-Bóer de 1899 a 1902 y evidentemente va a ser mucho más extensa y brutal que la primera. En resumen, y para finalizar, esta Primera Guerra Anglo-Bóer de 1880-1881 pues es un breve conflicto en el que los Boers van a demostrar a los británicos, gracias a su movilidad y tácticas de guerrilla, logrando pues, restaurar su autonomía en el Transvaal, aunque evidentemente bajo la sombra del poder británico. Y con ello, esta pequeña introducción histórica a la grabación de Historia Militar de hoy con el Teniente Coronel Jean-Pierre Scherman. Muchas gracias, Laura.
Thank you, David. An excellent presentation of this episode segment of military history. Today we have a special guest to talk about this exciting episode, Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Pierre Scherman. He is an officer in South Africa Armed Corps with more than 30 years of military experience. He has participated in international operations. He is currently a professor of military history at Stellenbosch University, holds a doctorate in military science, and is an expert in 20th and 21st century South Africa military history. So let's welcome Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Pierre. Thank you so much for joining us. And the audience is all yours to begin your presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to both David and Laura for the kind invitation to once again speak at the masterclass. If I can, I want to just share my screen. If you could just confirm that it is showing.
Okay.
Can you see this? Can you see the screen and can you see the slides?
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. To the students, welcome to this masterclass. Thank you for the very kind introductions. I teach at the South African Military Academy, and the First Anglo-Boer War is considered one of the pivotal conflicts here in Southern Africa. It shapes South Africa as a country quite dramatically, and as we go through today, you will obviously see how this campaign, even though it is quite short in nature, actually is quite important to South Africa and its history going forward. If you look and see, this is the area we're talking about. This is the South African, the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek in Dutch, the South African Republic. Colloquially, it's just called the Transvaal, over the River Vaal. And this is roughly the area that we will be discussing this evening, that will be our focus for this class. If you look and see the introduction to the war, for those of you that were able to attend the first class on South African military history will remember that during the Napoleonic Wars, South Africa has a change of government. The Dutch, who have been in control of South Africa for 149 years, are removed as the colonial power, and they are replaced by the British in 1802 and then again in 1806. And for the original Dutch colonists, this becomes a very emotional issue. Their language, their culture is now under threat. And literally about 30 years later, in 1840, a large portion of these Dutch settlers decide to leave the British colony, the Cape Colony, and go into the hinterland of Africa. And by the 1850s, they have traveled to a high plateau that forms a central geographical feature of South Africa, and they've established themselves into two independent Boer republics. They speak Dutch as their language, they are Calvinistic in religion, and they want very little to do with the British, who they don't particularly trust and they don't particularly like. In 1852, the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek is recognized by the British as an independent republic under the Sand River Convention. And the republic is backwards. There's got no schooling, there's no schools, there's no university, there's very little infrastructure. These have gone into a part of Africa that has not been changed in 1,000 years. And they are slowly building their towns, building their settlements up, but it is, for all intents and purposes, very, very rural as a territory. However, 30 years after granting the South African Republic its independence, suddenly in April of 1877, the British march in without any opposition and annex the territory all again. And the question was obviously asked, why? Why the change of heart? Why the change of situations where in 1852, the British were happy to grant this large area independence completely from their control. And now 30 years later in 1877, the British have marched in and granted without much opposition, taken and annexed the territory again. And you can look and see on your slides, there are a couple of factors. Firstly, the geopolitical strategy. The British have been trying to consolidate their power in Southern Africa. They control by this stage two colonies, the original Cape Colony of the Dutch, plus a new colony, the Natal Colony. And they have been looking for a way to increase their standing, increase their ability to control the interior of South Africa, because those two colonies are on the coast. And they see a strong Transvaal South African Republic as a threat to this continued control that they wish under a federation to be able to control. Economically, there is also a motivation. The discovery of diamonds on the very edge of the Cape and what is the Free State, the other Boer Republic's territory, creates an economic awareness that there could be untapped economic resources within this area. And we all know today that not long after the end of the First Anglo-Boer War, the world's richest gold deposits will be discovered. What is today the city of Johannesburg. At one stage, it will constitute 70% of the world's total gold production. But this is 5 years before those major gold deposits are discovered. But the British suspect, and because they suspect, there is an economic motive for going and annexing this area. The Transvaal, the South African Republic government, is, by all intents and purposes, a weak government. It is financially unstable, it is politically weak, and they do not have control over the entire territory at all. A lot of these original Dutch citizens that left the Cape Colony in the 1840s were very independently minded, have not got a lot of love for central government, are not really interested in things like paying taxes. They are very independent. They run their own lives. They do what they want, and nobody will tell them what they really want to do. So any government structure is quite alien to these people. They also have conflict with local African groups. The South African Republic is embroiled in various disputes with very powerful African groups in the area, particularly the Pedi under their ruler Sekekume, and the British under Sir Shepstone argues that annexing the South African Republic will actually stabilize the area, because this endemic warfare on what we call the high veld, the higher plateau of Central Africa, is impediment to British expansion. And then there is the basic imperial ambitions of the British. The British want to control large tracts of the planet. They want to be able to link the Cape to Cairo. They want to control Africa. They want to control the sea route around Africa. So you have this imperial ambitions as well as part of the factors that encourage the British to walk in. So Sir Shepstone, acting on behalf of the British government, proclaims the annexation of in Pretoria, the new capital city of the South African Republic, and he cites that the reason that he's doing this is the inability of the South African Republic to effectively govern their territory. The Boers, or the original Dutch settlers, the Boer is a Dutch Afrikaans name meaning farmer, because that is the predominant occupation that these people follow. You find very few other occupations. There's no such things as doctors and nurses and lawyers. Those occupations don't actually exist within the South African Republic. It is a very, very rudimentary administrative system that is in place there. But anyways, these Boers view this annexation as a violation of their hard-won independence that they achieved in the 1850s. And they fear, obviously, the loss of this political autonomy under a centralized British authority. Many of them participated in the Great Trek, the leaving of the Cape Colony to come to interior South Africa, or have been born in the Transvaal itself and don't know the British. And there is this cultural difference between the Afrikaans, Dutch-speaking, and the British-speaking people, and they do not want to be part of the British Empire. Rising Afrikaner nationalism will begin to foster itself into a collective resistance to this British occupation. And the British don't do themselves any favors by coming in. They refuse any meaningful self-government for Afrikaners within this territory, and this just intensifies the already existing tensions between the two groups. And to add fire to, or petrol to the fire, fuel to the fire, Britain inherits, when it takes over the territory, the problems with the powerful African kingdoms that are also there, specifically the Pedi and the Zulu threats. Now, those who attended the first masterclass on South African military history will remember that we finished off with the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. So literally it is a year later, and the Zulus are defeated but not destroyed. They still pose a threat, and the Pedi, who have very successfully defended their territories against European incursion, are well armed. They're also armed with firearms by now. And the Pedi form a very powerful kingdom to the north of what is today the Limpopo province of South Africa. The imposition of British taxes particularly irks the rural Boer communities. They do not really have, there's no currency in the Transvaal, and they're very much living on a barter system, and the payment of taxes is quite alien to these people, and they do not understand it, and nor do they want to particularly pay it. That, in combination with economic hardships that have been brought about by droughts and poor harvests, have amplified Boer discontent with the entire British rule. And like I already mentioned, the discovery of diamonds in the Northern Cape on their borders has heightened Britain's strategic interest in controlling this vast region over the Transvaal, over the Vaal River, colloquially known as the Transvaal. We look and see the major personalities that will take place and play a prominent part in the conflict to come. The very first one is the president of the South African Republic, commonly known as Paul Krueger. The Kruger National Park, one of the largest game reserves in the world, is named in his honor. He's born in the Cape Colony, and he, as a child, takes part with his parents in this great track of leaving the Cape and immigrating into the hinterland of South Africa. He has absolutely almost no education whatsoever. He's homeschooled, for a modern term, by his mother and his father, and the only book that is available for schooling is the Bible. So he's incredibly religious, but not really educated. He's a protege of one of the great Voortrekker leaders, Andries Pretorius, and he has played from a very young age already a prominent role in Boer society. He's present at a couple of the major earlier battles fought by the Voortrekkers. And in 1863, he is elected as Commandant General, in other words, the leading military authority within the South African Republic. By 1877, on the verge of our story, he is appointed as Vice President of the Republic. So he will play a prominent part in what our story is. The next person is Petrus Jacobus Joubert. He's also born in the Cape Colony and is a descendant of French Huguenots. There is a large French descendant population within South Africa today that trace their heritage back to the French Huguenots, specifically, obviously, because the Dutch were Protestant. The French Huguenots found a home here in South Africa. Joubert has migrated to the Wakkerstroom district of the South African Republic, and he is elected to the parliament, the Volksraad of the South African Republic in 1860s. And by 1870, on very, very scant educational background, he is appointed as the Attorney General of the Republic. And by 1880, he replaces Krueger as the Commandant General of all the Republic's military forces located within their territory. The last person is General Piet. He is born in the Cape Colony, but raised in the South African Republic after moving there with his parents during the Great Track. As a 12-year-old, he has participated in the Battle of Boomplots. For those who attended last time's session will remember that battle between the British and the Boers in the Free State. So he has already fought the British once already in his lifetime. He will lead the Boer resistance in combating British tax collections, and he will play a prominent part in the very first part of our story when he leads a Boer commando into the town of Potchefstroom, and we will get to further on in our story how he actually plays. On the British side, the leading British personality is Major General Sir George Pomeroy Colley. He is born in Ireland and is educated at Royal Military College in Sandhurst, and at the age of 16, he is offered the first part of an ensigncy. In other words, he becomes an officer in the British Army and is sent to the 2nd Queen's Regiment of Foot. By 1880, he is a general and is appointed governor and commander-in-chief of all British forces in the British colony of Natal. He will command the Natal Field Force, or the British military forces in the colony of Natal during this conflict. But despite his extensive experience, he has been a soldier since the age of 16. Collier underestimates the Boers and will have many difficulties due to lack of reinforcements and outdated tactics, which we will discuss later on how to go about his business. Let's start with the war. It starts quite small. A Boer farmer by the name of Piet is taxed, and he refuses to pay the tax. And because he refuses to pay, the British authorities, who have taken over the management of the Transvaal, come and they confiscate his wagon. And they intend to sell it at an auction to collect money so that he can pay his tax. When the local Boers hear of this transgression that the British have done against this gentleman, they are incensed, they are angry. And leading by that General Piet Krueger, he goes into the town of Potchefstroom, the closest town to where Piet lives, and he reclaims by force this wagon that the British are trying to auction off. The next month, in December of 1880, thousands of these Afrikaner Boer settlers gather together at a place called Paardeberg, where they declare once again that they are independent from British rule. In other words, they starting an uprising because Britain is now controlling the South African Republic. So they have been trying to passively convince the British to leave. It obviously hasn't worked. So they decide to end their passive resistance and resort to violence to regain their republic from the British control. Now, you must remember that these are a handful of gentlemen fighting against the largest empire that the world had known up to that stage. The British Empire is stretching from east to west. It controls a quarter of the globe's total land population. It is, by all intents and purposes, an ginormous empire with military might and military resources that are unmatched anywhere in the world. And the Boer commandos and the Boers that are opposing them are literally a few hundred people strong. So on paper, you would think that this would be a quick and easy victory for the British. After their declaration at Paardeberg, the Boer commandos moved their capital to a town called Heidelberg in the southern Transvaal, and they have to be able to spread this message that insurrection is taking place. And like I told you, there's very few infrastructure in that part of South Africa at that stage. A lot of people don't stay in towns. And the only way to actually get the message through that war has started is to print out on little notices that this is what's happening and place it in public places. There's few towns that do actually exist. And when the farmers come in once a month to do their shopping and to buy goods at the local store, they will then obviously see the notice and they know what is happening. This is pre-radio and pre-television and any of those types of news media. So news is spread either by word of mouth or through these little pamphlets that are being printed. So the Boer commanders enter Potchefstroom, where this proclamation of Boer independence is set to be printed at a local printing store. However, there is a British garrison already in Potchefstroom, and the first shots fired of this campaign will take place here. The British try and stop the printing of the proclamation. Rifle fire is exchanged, and in retaliation, the Boers are so angry that they set fire to certain government buildings within the days. The British force is in a little military fort, and they are surrounded. And for the next 95 days, they will be under siege. The Boers will prevent them from leaving the fort until they actually surrender. Now, the Boer strategy is quite simple and quite straightforward. They realize that they are heavily outnumbered, heavily outmanned, but they're not heavily outnumbered at that stage. Britain does not have a large military force currently deployed within the Transvaal. Yes, they have forces all over the world, and they have access to all these forces, but that will take time. All these forces from India, from England, from Australia, from wherever in the world will have to climb on a ship and sail to South Africa to become effective. And the Boers realize this. If they can act quickly, they can basically eliminate the British presence in the South African Republic before all these massive reinforcements arrive. So their strategy is twofold. Firstly, they want to isolate and contain those British forces that are already inside the Transvaal. There are several scattered British garrisons that are thus besieged by the Boer forces. Potchefstroom, which you just mentioned, is the most notable siege that lasts 95 days. The capital city, Pretoria, is the administrative capital of the Republic, and the British, obviously, when they took over the Transvaal, established their own administrative capital there and their military capital there. So Pretoria has got by far the largest military force of the British. The town of Lydenburg, and I will show you a map now, is far in the eastern side of the Transvaal Republic. The reason that Lydenburg is established is that the first traces of gold, alluvial gold, is found in this area. And the town of Lydenburg is a direct result of a gold rush coming into that area. So the British already, you can see the economic link, they already moved to Lydenburg to try and control the access to the gold. There are smaller other towns, Rustenburg, Marabastad, Standerton, and Wakkerstroom. Each one has a small contingent of British soldiers in it, and all these areas will be placed under siege by local Boer forces. The Boer strategy is thus effectively to use the local knowledge to cut off British supply lines and communications and place these garrisons under sustained pressure until they will obviously surrender. But they must also stop reinforcements from entering into the Transvaal. So General Piet, the Commandant General of the South African Forces, has got two tasks. He must contain the British soldiers that are already in the Republic, and he must prevent reinforcements from entering the Republic. And you know a little bit about the geography of South Africa. The Cape interior is very dry. It's called the Karoo. It's a semi-desert area, but the Natal colony that it touches onto the Transvaal, it is very tropical, and it is much easier to, in shorter distance, to move from Natal into the Transvaal. And General Joubert realizes that General Colley, who's in control of all the British forces inside Natal, is going to be his greatest threat. He must prevent Colley from being able to use the forces of the British Army that's deployed in Natal and move them into the Transvaal. There's a modern map of South Africa. You can see the four markers I've put on the map are the major British garrisons that we've just spoken about. Far to the east, there, you can see my marker far to the east, that is Lydenburg. There is Pretoria, the capital city. There is Rustenburg, and there is Potchefstroom, where the first shots of this campaign. Okay, so those are roughly the distances that we are talking about. Now, once again, I remind you that there are no roads. This is these are dirt tracks that are going by wagon. If you can, those of you who have ever watched Hollywood movies and you think about the American Wild Wild West, this is very the type of situation you must consider yourself thinking. This is not Europe of the 1800s. This is rural Africa of the 1880s. The very first, and we're going to be speaking about four major turning points in the war, and they revolve around four major battles, and I will discuss them chronologically in detail, and you will see how each one leads itself to a certain thing. The first one is the Battle of Bronkhorstspruit in 20 December of 1818. The Battle of Bronkhorstspruit marks the first major engagement of the war. I told you that the British garrisons are besieged, and one of them is Lydenburg. Lydenburg being far to the east, when news reaches Lydenburg's garrison that the Boers have gone into insurrection, their commander is ordered to pack up and return to Pretoria. Now, in kilometers wise, that's about 400 kilometers. But in reality, without roads and infrastructure and bridges to cross rivers, that is literally months worth of traveling. Now, the British commander in Lydenburg is Lieutenant Colonel Philip Robert Anthester, and he receives orders on the 27th of November 1880 to lead his command, lead his soldiers out of Lydenburg and return to headquarters, return to Pretoria. He takes in the vicinity of 300 to 330 men with him. He leaves a very small garrison behind just to look after the town. But the majority of his battalion, he then puts on wagons, and they are literally walking the 8 kilometers back to Pretoria. He is in no rush, though. Even though he got his orders on the 27th of November, he is only leaving Lydenburg on 5 December. And you'll see that of the 330 men that he has under his regiment, only between 245 and 270 of the soldiers actually accompany him. There are some wives, there are some children, and there's 60 African wagoneers who are driving and controlling his wagons to get all his equipment, all his stores, and those type of things along with him. The British progress very, very slowly. They are on average only doing between 14 and 15 kilometers per day. They are hampered by swollen rivers and muddy roads that exist barely, and they arrive in Middelburg by the 15th of December 1880. And again, I will show you a map now. There you can see Lydenburg in purple. There on the far eastern side, there you can see the escarpment of South Africa. All our waterfalls and all the major rivers that are coming from this high ground, this high veld here, are all flowing to the east into the Indian Ocean. So that's very much waterfall area, and that's where the first alluvial gold is discovered. There you can see Middelburg as the town tells you. It's in the middle between Pretoria, the capital city, and the gold fields in the east. So Middelburg is situated there, and that is where Bronkhorstspruit is, where this battle will actually take place. On the 19th of December, Colonel Anthony is warned by local British and by local Boers that the Boers are planning to attack his column. But he dismisses this intelligence quite arrogantly. He's typically British. He's like, we are the British Army. Who would dare attack us? These people haven't even got education. They can't even read and write. Why would they bother? In response to Anthony's continued march on Pretoria, the local Boers under Field Cornet, which is basically a junior officer, Francois Gerhardus Joubert, after declaring independence on the 13th of December, he has mobilized the commando. Now, the commando is the local, every male between the ages of 16 to 60 in the district, in that area. He mobilizes all these citizens. They are not a standing army. They're not a regular army in any way or form. They are normal citizens of the territory. And he mobilizes all of them. They're all armed and they all have their own horse. Part of the commando system, when you arrive on commando, you must bring your own rifle, you must bring your own horse, and you must bring at least enough rations for 5 days. So when the commando is formed under his command, about 200 to 300 mounted riflemen report for service from that area. And they begin to shadow this British column that is moving so slowly from Middelburg towards Pretoria. As the column approaches Bronkhorstspruit, Spruit is the Dutch word for a little river. On the 20th of December, Field Cornet Joubert sends one of his men, a young man by the name of Paul de Piet, under a white flag to go and speak to the British. And he delivers a letter of demand demanding that the British halt, stop advancing on Pretoria, and hand over their weapons. I'm assuming that they've chosen De Beer because he can speak English. There's the chance that the British will be able to speak Dutch is very, very little. And Paul de Beer, I'm assuming, can speak English. And that is why he gets the job. Anschutz, after hearing De Beer's story, absolutely refuses the demand. And he cites his order saying that his orders say he must go to headquarters in Pretoria, and he's ignoring what the Boer request is, and he's continuing with his advance towards Pretoria. De Beer warns him that if he doesn't comply, there will be consequences. But Anschutz refuses to obey, and De Beer then leaves. Not long thereafter, Boer marksmen who have taken up positions open fire from concealed positions at almost point-blank range on this British column. One thing that the Boers have, they might not be military trained, but they have been living their entire lives in Africa. They are expert marksmen, and they are expert because most of them spend a large portion of their day hunting food, animals of Africa for food. They have perfected the camouflage, they have perfected movement in the field to not be seen. So at point blank range, these expert skilled marksmen start engaging this British column. They target the officers and the non-commissioned officers first, the leader group, and the British column is tightly packed. They are not expecting resistance. They are not in any combat formations or anything like that. They are tired. They've been walking for weeks now. A lot of the soldiers have left their rifles on the wagons. The British are absolutely unprepared, and they have not put out skirmishes, and this initial assault by the Boers devastates the column, and chaos ensues. Within 15 minutes, Colonel Jean is shot 5 times, and one of his last orders before passing away is he orders his men to surrender. The British casualties are catastrophic. 5 officers and 63 men have been killed, and 4 officers and 85 men have been wounded in literally 15 minutes, while the Boers report only 1 or 2 killed and less than 4 or 5 of them. It has been a classic ambush with a classic surprise element to it. Following the surrender, the Boers obviously loot the ammunition and supplies, because one thing that the Boers can't replicate is they have no factories, they have no industry, so they cannot make weapons, they cannot make ammunition, they cannot produce any of that out of their own stock. So if they don't take it from the enemy, they won't have it. So the Boers loot specifically their ammunition and supplies to restock their own abilities, and they still provide tents and food for the wounded. They even allow some of the British to go to Pretoria because they don't have doctors, they don't have medical staff to be able to treat any of these injured British soldiers. So they allow the British survivors quickly to go to Pretoria to get medical aid. The news of this initial skirmish spreads through the Transvaal like wildfire, and it electrifies Boer morale, and it assists in recruitment, because many of the Boers are uncertain. Can they actually win? Can they actually fight the British Empire and win? And news of what's happened at Bronkhorstspruit and the victory that has been achieved over the British spreads through the communities, and more men decide to join the Boer cause. We now jump to Natal. General Colley has been activated by the British Army, and his orders are quite simple. Move from Natal into the Transvaal, into the South African Republic, and relieve all these British garrisons that are being besieged by the Boers as quickly as possible before they can surrender. Now, General Joubert, the leading military man within the Transvaal, he knows this. He knows this is the logical way of going about it. And he looks at the terrain and he looks at the map and he realizes the most logical way for the British Army to move from Natal into the Transvaal is to follow the existing trade routes going. And that trade route goes over a high ground. And this high ground is dominated by a little pass called Lane's Neck. It's a strategic mountain pass in northern Natal, close to the Transvaal Republic. General Colley obviously must relieve the British garrisons as quickly as possible, and he has to cross over this pass. There is no other logical way. The other ways are way too far away for him to realistically consider them. Colley is leading a force of about 1,200 troops from Natal into the towards the Transvaal garrisons. He also has infantry, cavalry, and artillery. The Boers have none of that. They don't have any differential. They only have these commandos, these untrained citizen soldiers. That's the entire army. That's all that it consists out of. And 400 to 500 of these commandos have taken up position under the command of General Joubert on Lane's Neck. And they dig in. They understand the lie of the land. They understand the value that trenches have, and they've dug themselves in. They might be untrained, but they are skilled marksmen, and they set up a very strong defensive position dominating the pass. British reconnaissance, who's moving in front of General Colley's force, underestimates the Boer defenses and underestimates the resolve and the tenacity of the Boers, and this will lead to a terrible miscalculation on the British part. General Colley, who sets up his camp at a place called Mount Prospect, just in front of the pass, looks at the map and decides he's not going to mess around with these people. He will do a straightforward frontal assault towards his towards the Boer lines rather, and they will just remove these Boer untrained soldiers out of his path, and then he will continue with his march into Pretoria. The British follow a very strict and unwavering battle plan, and you'll see it repeated over and over again. First step on the battle plan is the British artillery. They will engage all known enemy positions with the British artillery. While this is taking place, the British infantry march closer. And when they get close enough to be able to begin engaging, the British artillery stop and the British infantry take over, and then they advance towards the enemy positions. There is no outflanking. There's none of that type of things. It's a straightforward advance, straight forward, frontal assault. And the last part of the British plan, the third part, is the British cavalry. They are responsible to go around the flanks, the sides of any enemy position, attack the flanks and sides. And if your enemy starts to run away, is defeated and flees, the British cavalry is then tasked to chase them down and kill them while they flee. That is the basic British military plan. It has been that way since Napoleon's times, and the British have not evolved their tactics at all over 100 years. There you can see on the map where Lane's Neck, the high ground, is that separates Natal from the Transvaal, the South African Republic, and where this battle will take place. At about 9 o'clock in the morning of 28 January, General Colley orders his infantry, primarily coming from the 58th Regiment of Foot, to advance against these defensive positions that the Boers are occupying. The British artillery deploys and starts engaging the British, or the Boer positions rather, that they have been able to identify while the British infantry actually moves forward. The Boers are armed with the German manufactured Mauser rifles, and they open fire from these concealed positions and begin to inflict heavy casualties on the British. Now, you must understand that the British Army of 1880 is still dressed in their traditional red tunics and white helmets, and they are absolutely visible on the battlefield. They have got no camouflage whatsoever. These gentlemen in these bright scarlet red jackets with these pitch white helmets and webbing stand out. The Boers, in contrast, are wearing their normal day-to-day clothing, browns, greens, normal clothing that a farmer would wear, rough wool, and they blend in. They are almost invisible. The British cannot see them. They have blended in, camouflaged themselves perfectly with their terrain. The British exposed are taking horrendous casualties. They're moving up in these little blocks. The infantry is being overwhelmed. The British cavalry, who's supposed to protect their flanks, the head of the British cavalry has a rush of blood when he becomes personally under fire, and he orders his men to charge. And the British cavalry is decimated by rifle fire and basically is removed from the battlefield and are unable to contribute and assist the British infantry in any way. After several hours of heavy fighting, General Colley realizes that this entire battle plan of his has fallen apart. His men are being slaughtered. He can't see the Boers. His artillery is ineffective. His infantry is exhausted because they're trying to fight uphill. It's hot. It's January. It's South Africa, Southern Hemisphere. January in that part of the world, it's easy 30 degrees Celsius, 35 degrees Celsius. So the whole day has turned into a bit of a mess for the British. The British suffer 84 killed and 113 wounded, and 2 of them are captured, while the Boer losses are minimal, only 14 killed and 27 wounded. This defeat exposes the British tactical shortcomings. They are trying to fight a Napoleonic type of war against an enemy that has never even heard of Napoleon, has no idea where Europe is. They're untrained in European battle standards, but they have got good marksmanship, they've got good discipline, and they understand the terrain that they are operating on. The Boers use effectively their defensive positions, and their marksmanship proves decisive. Again, this is the first time that the Boers are fighting the mainstay British military system. And by being victorious, this obviously boosts their morale extensively. They have been able to beat this mighty British Empire, frontal assault against their positions with their artillery, with their cavalry, and they've been able to resist. And not only resist, they've come away with very few casualties, and they can see that they have caused a lot of damage to the British Army that is trying to enter into Natal. For the British, the loss at Lane's Neck is a humiliating setback. How can they lose to farmers? They're not losing to professional soldiers. They are losing to literally people who can't even read and write. These people are backwards. These people are uneducated, but they have beaten them soundly for twice in a row now on the battlefield. So it is a humiliating setback for the entire British Army. The following month, just south of where we were now, Boer commandos under Commandant Weilbach have been harassing the British lines of communication because after the Battle of Lane's Neck, General Colley stays in his camp at the foot of the hills. But all his supplies are coming from the port city of Durban and Richards Bay, and they must follow the basic road up to Mount Prospect where his camp is. And these convoys of goods and services and reinforcements are constantly being attacked by Boer raiding parties as in his rear lines. So to counter this threat, Colley decides he has to do a military operation. He must secure his lines of communication. And he decides that he will personally lead a military force back down towards the coast and remove all these Boer forces that are harassing his soldiers as they move up and down from the coast to his camp. At dawn on the 8th of February, ambulances and mail leave for the town of Newcastle under escort, followed by Colley's main force, which again is roughly about 1,200 men strong. The column consists out of the 60th Rifles Regiment, the 2nd 15th Rifle Regiment, along with mounted troops and artillery. And Colley aims to meet an incoming convoy at a river south of his positions, the Ngogo River, and clear the area basically of any Boer threats if they attempt to attack him. His force makes good time and reaches the banks of the Ngogo River without any instances and any hassles. The road crosses over this river. Now, again, there's no infrastructure in South Africa, so they are making use of a natural crossing place, a drift. There's no bridge involved. Nobody's built bridges yet in South Africa in this part of the world. So you have to cross at this natural crossing point that exists on every river. So to be able to protect this, General Colley leaves a small portion of his force, the artillery and a company of infantry at this drift. And with the rest of his force, he crosses over the Hatta and the Ngogo rivers and continues down towards Newcastle. There you can see the purple is there at Mount Prospect. There is Lane's Neck, who we just spoke about, and here is the Ngogo River, and he's heading towards the town of Newcastle, where he hopes to collect more reinforcements, more supplies, more ammunition, food, everything that he will require. After crossing the Ngogo River, the road picks up to a high plateau named called Skynswerkte. And when General Colley's force reaches the top of this high ground, they start drawing fire from Boer marksmen. And he is forced to deploy on both sides of the road to get his men under cover because they are taking casualties from accurate Boer fire. And he deploys them in a semicircle and they start to return fire. Again, they are dressed in their red tunics. They are absolutely visible, and the people that are fighting, the Boers, are invisible. They are wearing their natural green-brown clothing, and the Boers are taking advantage of every bit of cover, every bit of vegetation, and they are slowly and surely encircling the entire British force stuck on Skynswerkte. The British dominate the high ground, but they can't see the Boers. They can't engage them effectively. There are very few targets for the British gunners who are on the other side of the river, who have deployed there as part of Colley's securing force over the drift. They can't see, and if you can't see any targets, British artillery becomes absolutely useless. Colley realizes that the British are in danger of being outflanked. So he orders one of his junior officers, Captain McGregor, to take a company and move to his right flank over the road to try and stop the Boers from exploiting this open left flank of his. McGregor is killed in carrying out his orders, and the company, as they move, are excellent targets and are literally shot to pieces. Only one officer and 4 riflemen of the entire company actually survive that move from the left flank to try and cover it up. The battle continues throughout the day. The Boers, through their superior marksmanship, are wreaking havoc amongst the British army, who are trying their best to hold ground on top of this high ground. Shortly after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, typically South Africa summer weather, thunderstorm comes in very quickly, but very strong, a lot of rain, short minute at a time. Torrential downpour, which is for many a blessing. They've been stuck out in the hot African sun for the entire day fighting and haven't had a chance to get back to refill their water bottles at the river. So for them, it is a blessing. When night falls, the fighting obviously stops. Nobody's prepared to fight in the dark. It is 1880s. There's no such thing yet as being able to fight in the dark. Both sides then inadvertently leave. The Boers are hoping to keep their cordon around this British position, and when the new day comes, attack again, and then hopefully seize the high ground and capture or kill all the British that are still on the high ground. General Colley, however, realizes he cannot stay on this high ground. He has suffered so many casualties that he must get out while he can. And after nightfall, at about 9:30 that evening, leaving his wounded and dead behind, which generally for military is not done. You always try and bring your wounded and dead with you. General Colley realizes he has so many wounded, there's no ways that he can move them with him. So all those soldiers who can still move, who aren't injured, are withdrawn. He also hasn't got sufficient horses anymore to withdraw the guns that he has with him or the ammunition with him. So the horses that have survived, because a lot of the horses have been killed, the Boers on purpose to shoot horses to prevent them being used by the army. He has sufficient horses just to move his guns, but he can't move his wagons. Colley slips out of this encirclement, and that is for the Boers a large mistake. They have not. They have abandoned their positions. It's raining. They're cold. They don't want to keep, even though their orders were to stay in these positions, they abandon their positions and they allow the British off the battlefield. And Colley moves his force down to the river. And now he must cross back over to the other side. But because of the torrential downpour, that small little river that he crossed in the morning is no longer a small little river. The Ngongo is now in flood. But he has no choice. So he forces his way over the river. Unfortunately, 9 of his men are washed away and they will drown in the crossing of the river. The British losses, again, are quite horrendous for such a small conflict. 4 officers and 62 members killed, 4 officers and 63 that are wounded and left still on position. And then if you add all together, including those who drowned, it gives you 142 casualties. The Boers, in contrast, have only lost 8 killed and 6 wounded, of which 2 would subsequently die. So Skynswerter is a third disaster for the British Army. They have lost 3 in a row, and they are literally at the end of their tether with the Boers. The final nail in the coffin for the British Army in 1881 is the Battle of Majuba Hill. It is of all the battles that take place during this conflict, this is the one that is the most famous. It is the one that is most well known within South Africa. And for those that study military history outside South Africa, if anybody would know anything about the First Anglo-Boer War, 10-1, this is the battle that they would have heard of somewhere, somehow. After Skynswerter, the British Army is demoralized. They have lost 3 in a row. The garrisons that are still stuck in the Transvaal are running out of food, running out of water, running out of supplies. And General Colley is under immense pressure from London to sort this out. In fact, London is convinced that General Colley hasn't got the ability anymore to actually get the job done. And they are already beginning to negotiate with the South African Republic for an armistice, a way to stop the fighting. Let's get to a political solution to a political problem, because the military solution has not actually worked. Now, for General Colley, he can't leave it like this. It is for him a personal embarrassment. How can these people defeat him? He's a general in the British Army. They are the mightiest army on the planet. So, contrary to his orders, General Colley decides to try one more time. And the plan that he comes with is quite ingenious. There you can see a photograph of the high ground, Majuba. Lane's Neck, that area that General Joubert has fortified. It's quite a large mountain range, and Majuba Hill is on the far left-hand side. If you're looking from a British perspective, looking north, it is the high ground on the far left-hand side of this terrain feature. And it is very high, and the Boers have not fortified it at all. It is a bit further removed from the main pass that goes over the mountain range, and Colley believes that if he can occupy Majuba Hill, as it is the highest terrain form in the area, he then will be in a dominant position. And he is right. If by occupying Majuba Hill, he will then place the Boers in their trenches below on Land's Neck in an untenuous position. So Colley decides he's going to do a night assault. Now, I already told you that night operations in 1880 are very, very rare for obvious reasons. There's no such thing as GPS or torches or being able to move at night. It is quite a risky operation. But Colley himself leads 405 British soldiers from units that include the 58th Regiment, the 92nd Highlanders, and a small naval brigade. He leads them up during the night up onto the top of Majuba Hill. However, he makes a couple of critical mistakes in this operation. Firstly, he doesn't take any artillery with him, and he doesn't take any of his pom-pom machine guns with him because he believes that the slopes of the mountain are too steep to get his soldiers to the top of it. The soldiers are tired. They've walked through the night, they've climbed up the mountain, and by the time they get to the top, everybody just sits down and starts resting. Nobody digs in. Nobody prepares defensive positions. And that is a second critical mistake that the British will do. The sun rises at dawn, and the British very foolishly allow their soldiers to stand up and start cheering because they think they have achieved a wonderful military surprise, which they have done, but the job is not done. For the Boers, it comes as a massive shock. This dominant terrain feature on their flank has been seized during the night. And they immediately start panicking because they think the British have taken artillery onto this high ground and are now within range to decimate their forces with artillery. And it takes them a little while to realize, but no artillery is being shot at them. And they realize that the British have not actually brought artillery with them. And under the leadership of General Joubert, who calls for volunteers, 3 storming parties, 3 groups of between 100 and 200 men each, leave the Boer lines, and they start on their own routes, under their own leaders, to start climbing up Majuba Hill. The British on top see this movement and start to try and engage and to start shooting at these Boers as they move them. Again, the Boers are making use of fire and movement, which is very novel. Now, today, we accept it as part and parcel of military tactics. But in 1880, that was a very novel thing. One soldier shoots, the other soldier moves. Because when you're shooting at an enemy, the natural reaction is that person to duck down because he doesn't want to be killed. So you can then supportingly move across open terrain. And the Boers are naturally doing, nobody has taught them how to ever do this. It's just a natural way of moving for them, that they are firing and maneuvering all 3 groups. And so they are slowly going up the edge of the sides of the mountains towards the British lines who are on top of the mountain. The Boers methodically exempt, using the hill's natural cover to approach almost undetected. They are by far the better marksmen, and they are able to seize what is called Gordon's Knoll. It is a little high ground, and by lunchtime, they are able to capture it from the defending British soldiers. By mid-morning, the Boers have also reached the slopes just below the summit and are now able to launch coordinated assaults against these British soldiers that are on the open on top of the summit. Colley has spent, since he arrived there, sleeping. And when his soldiers and officers waking up in a panic saying, but the Boers are against us, he's not really understanding what they mean, because when he went to bed, everything was fine, and now there's a disaster again. Colley's troops resisting in the open are suffering heavy casualties. Again, their marksmanship isn't very good. They are trained typically like the Napoleonic soldiers are. They line up in blocks. The enemy is in a block in front of you. You do not have to be able to fire accurately. You must just fire quickly. So they are trained in the British Army to fire quickly, but they aren't really trained to aim, control their breathing, pick out an individual target and fire. The Boers, on the other hand, from a young age, ammunition is expensive. Weapons are expensive. So a young boy is taught by his father how to shoot, and he is taught to shoot accurately, because every time he misses, it is money that his family has to pay. So for them, accuracy is paramount. For the British Army, it is not a big issue until the beginning of this battle. More and more Boers are eventually seen climbing up this mountain and engaging the British force on top of it. And eventually, under pressure, the British line will collapse, and the survivors of General Colley's command will flee off the mountain in any way they can to get away from the Boers, and they abandon their positions. Amid this great confusion and slaughter, General Colley himself is trying to still keep control, and he is unfortunately killed in the final moment, shot through the head by a Boer marksman. The British again suffered 92 killed and 134 wounded, along with 59 captured on the top of Majuba. The Boer casualties are again very, very light. If you look and see the aftermath of this peace, it is the last straw that breaks the camel's back. The British abandon all hope of a military decision in this campaign, and will now, from now on, rely on their politicians to try and come to terms with the Boers of the Transvaal Republic. In March of 1881, Sir Evelyn Wood, who replaces Colley as the leading British general in the era, signed an armistice to end the First Boer War. And in March, Wood himself is present at O'Neill's cottage, which is not far from Majuba, where the Vice President, Paul Krueger, is present, and they will sign then a treaty. In August that year, the British government and the Transvaal government will sign the Pretoria Convention, which will grant us the African Republic again self-government, which they had before the British intervention, but it will be a limited self-government under British suzerainty. The British thus recognize Boer autonomy, but retain control over foreign affairs. The three major battles of Lanes Neck, Skynswerth, and Majuba have created a fearsome legend in the minds of the British. They will never forget the absolute horror of trying to fight the Boers on their own territory. And remember, Majuba will become their battle rallying cry. For British historians, many have argued that the defeat by the British Army by the Boers in 1880 is the beginning of the decline of the British Empire. Up until that stage, the British Empire was virtually undefeated across most of the planet. The First Anglo-Boer War is the first time since the Revolutionary Wars in America the British are forced to either acknowledge the independence of a pre-war possession or sign a treaty on unfavorable terms that yield a significant amount of territory. So between the American War of Independence and the First Anglo-Boer War, the British Army has been victorious for more than 100 years. And they have been fighting literally in every part of the world, and they have been victorious in every single battle. So this loss to the Boer Army is for them and their country and their politicians an absolute shock. If you quickly look and see in conclusion the lessons learned that we as military historians can learn from this war, the fire and movement tactics employed by the Boers as they go up Majuba Hill are years ahead of their time. Most European armies do not even consider that as part of their military doctrine. They are still very much in a Napoleonic age and are fighting on those lines. The mobility over mass formation, Boer forces, even though they don't have artillery, they don't have anything, they are mobile. They have their own horses. They are a very mobile, lightly armed force. But this demonstrates that a lightly armed, mobile force can outmaneuver large conventional formations and win. The use of terrain, the mastery of local geography has allowed the Boers to select advantageous positions, such as high grounds or concealed approaches, or just use the terrain to their advantage. General British soldiers are not trained to read terrain. There is no need. They have large armies which you can't really make use of terrain that effectively. Smaller armies, especially small mobile armies, like the Boers, have been able to make masterful use of the terrain. Guerrilla tactics, skirmishing, ambushes, hit-and-run attacks have proved highly effective against traditional linear infantry tactics the British Army is employing. And lastly, the importance of marksmanship. From now on, not only will the British infantry have to start learning how to be good marksmen, but their weapon itself will have to change. They are going to introduce new rifles that are got grooves in it that'll have a projectile. Same as what the German Mauser rifle is that the Boers are using to increase their marksmanship, they increase their ability to engage targets over a longer range. If we look and see negatively, command flexibility, decentralized command enabled quick local decision, contrasting rigid British. The Boer army, because it isn't a set military system, it is very much the commando, a guerrilla style army. They are able to quickly make decisions. There's no higher headquarters must be first contacted and ask permission. Can I do this or can't I do that? Leaders on the ground in that area can make their decision autonomously and execute. Reconnaissance and intelligence, effective scouting by the Boers has given them an advantage. In contrast to poor scouting by the British Army, they don't understand the terrain that well. They aren't used to the weather, and they suffer quite substantially in the reconnaissance and intelligence phase. Psychological impact, the earlier British defeats have eroded their morale, and showing the perception and confidence is obviously a critical aspect in war. Every time the British lose, their morale dips, and every time the Boers win, their morale obviously is a counter, increases in strength. Logistical vulnerability, all the Boers are used to this area. They can live off the land. They understand where to find food, water, everything that they would need, fodder for their horses. The British are reliant on their logistics. So those logistic lines that are coming from the ports of Durban and Richards Bay and traveling up by these roads have to be maintained, and that makes them very vulnerable. And the Boers exploit that, thinking of Skaanswigte, where they are attacking these logistical lines. The integration of politics and war, Boer leaders blend their political objectives with their military action. They wanted independence for their country, and they realized that this was an effective way of actually achieving it. The British, on the other hand, cannot resolve their challenge through military means and are forced then to resolve politically to actually get it. And the decision actually made is to their detriment for the first time since the American War of Independence. And lastly, adaptation. When fighting on such a unstructured way, adaptation is absolutely necessary. You cannot follow rigid rules and regulations. The military system where officers have mission command, to use a modern terminology, to be able to make decisions quickly on the battlefield proves critical for Boer success during this campaign. Thank you. That was a bit of a mouthful. I'm hoping you've been able to follow that. It is within South Africa, obviously a very important part of our military history. The first time that South African forces are successfully able to engage a major European power and be successful in defeating the British Empire on home ground. And we will see that this is only a precursor. In 8 years, the British and the Boers will fight again in the Second Anglo-Boer War, which we will cover in a subsequent masterclass later on. But this will shape a lot of Boer mentality and British mentality, and we will see it being played out again during the Second Anglo-Boer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Pierre. Thank you very much for joining us on Voices of History. It is a real privilege for us to have you here to discuss this crucial episode in our military history. And if you are agree, let's start with some questions to put this important event into the context and delve deeper into the historical and strategic significance. So we start with the first question. David, si te parece, iniciamos con las preguntas para contextualizar también lo visto.
Perfecto, muchas gracias, Laura. Sí, la primera pregunta sería la siguiente. ¿Cuál fue la causa principal de la Primera Guerra Anglo-Bóer que enfrentó a los colonos de origen neerlandés que se establecieron en Sudáfrica a principios del siglo XVIII?
Okay, the first question is about what was the main cause of the First Anglo-Boer War between the Dutch settlers who established themselves in South Africa in the early 18th century and the British Empire?
There are 2 or 3 major reasons why the British are interested in the Transvaal. Firstly, economic. The discovery of diamonds on the very edge of the Transvaal lends the British to think that there's a possibility that there might be other minerals, diamonds, gold, something that is valuable in the Transvaal Republic. So that's the first reason. There's an economic reason. Secondly, is that the British realize that the Transvaal government is very, very weak. They have no real taxation base. They haven't got control over their territory. There's a major conflict between the Transvaal government and the Pedi Kingdom to their north. So there's an opportunity to come in, and there won't be much resistance to it. So that lends itself to the other reason, British imperialism. The British imperialists, British government officials believe it is British right to colonize Africa and to bring the entire continent under British control. And that is what they want to achieve. They want to bring all these different territories in Africa under their control. They want to link the Cape to Cairo. And this is a first step. People like Shepstone and all these British generals believe that it is Britain's right and might that they should be able to colonize this area and bring it under British control. The fact that there's a financial gain is nice, but it's not a total reason for doing it. They believe it is Britain's right to do so.
Thank you very much. An excellent answer. Thank you very much. We continue with a second question. Vamos a seguir con una siguiente pregunta, David.
Perdón, estaba sin el micro.
Sí.
La siguiente pregunta dice lo siguiente. ¿Podemos considerar la batalla de Majuba Hill, donde los Boers infligieron una derrota humillante a las fuerzas británicas, como la batalla más significativa de la guerra?
Okay, the second question is about can we consider that the Battle of the Majuba Hill, where the Boers inflicted a humiliating defeat of British forces, as the most significant battle of the war?
Absolutely. Majuba is the final straw that breaks the camel's back. The British have already lost 3 battles in a row, and for General Colley, the British commander, it is a gamble. He has nothing to lose. His reputation is been torn apart in the British newspapers back home. He is about to be fired from his command, and he feels that this is the only way to save his career, is to win at all costs. The plan that he comes with is a very good plan. A night assault, sneak in behind enemy lines, take a dominant area, and seize it from an enemy. That he does perfectly well. His soldiers do very well. Go up night, take control of Majuba Hill. What follows next is where the whole plan comes and falls apart. All these things we've been speaking about, poor marksmanship, poor discipline, poor basic equipment, wearing these ridiculous red coats in an African field, all comes down to torment him. The Boers, once they realize that they are not under threat, revert back into an assault mode or an offensive mode, and they are able to successfully scale up this mountain, and through firepower, movement, good tactics, and good discipline, actually defeat the British from a very strong position. And from such a strong dominant position to still lose is an absolute disaster for the British. Their morale was very low. Their political masters were already skeptical about the British Army's ability to win. And this is literally, like I said, the last act. The Colley has been killed, so he never has to answer to his masters about the disaster. But his replacement, General Evelyn Wood, has no desire to fight the Boers anymore. The political side will now take precedence, and a political solution will be found to Transvaal's independence, no longer a military one. And that is, Majuba will force that political decision down on the British, even though they don't want to. They have no desire for a political solution. They want a military solution, because they realize if a political solution is taking place, they are negotiating from a position of weakness, not a position of strength.
Thank you. Thank you very much. An excellent answer too. Seguimos con, we have a third question. Seguimos con una tercera pregunta también. David.
Dice lo siguiente, ¿qué tratado puso fin a la guerra y qué implicaciones tuvo para las repúblicas Boers?
The third question is about what treaty ended the war and what implication did it have for the Boer republics?
Okay, good question. The Convention of Pretoria in 1881 is the official end of the war. The implications are that the Boers regain their independence, but it is a limited independence in the sense that the British do not give them back everything that they want. They are independent in their own internal matters, but they are still under British hegemony in external matters, foreign relations and things like that. And this will cause resentment and will cause a souring of already bad relationships between the Boer republics and the British. And we will see that this festers and will be one of the reasons why the Second Anglo-Boer War will actually start 8 years from now.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel. We have the final question for our episode. David, tenemos una pregunta final también para continuar con nuestra programación.
Sí, la última pregunta dice lo siguiente. Paul Krueger y Piet Joubert, ¿qué papel jugaron durante la guerra como líderes de la resistencia? ¿Cuál fue la estrategia y la táctica militar empleada por los guerrilleros Boers?
The final question is about what role did Paul Krueger and Piet Joubert play during the war as a leader of the resistance, and what was the strategy and military tactics employed by the Boer guerrillas?
Again, a very good question. Paul Krueger is the vice president of the South African Republic, and he will lead the political battles, if you want to, against the British, and will be negotiating with the British. Piet Joubert is the Commandant General of the Boer forces, and he will lead the battlefield. He will be the general in charge of Lane's Neck and of Amajuba. It will be his battle plan, basically, to isolate the British garrisons that are already in the Transvaal, and that is the tactic that the Boers follow. They want to isolate the garrisons that are already in the Transvaal and simultaneously prevent any reinforcements from coming from specifically Natal into the Transvaal. And he's the one that identifies that the most logical way to do this would be go over the pass at Lane's Neck. So he fortifies the pass. He's the one that basically decides, okay, this is where we're going to fight. This is where we're going to set up our defensive positions. And by all accounts, the trenches that they build and the fortifications that they construct at Lane's Neck are top notch. They are able to withstand the Lane's Neck's artillery barrage right at the beginning of Lane's Neck. So these are not small fortifications. These aren't hastily built fortifications. These are well-constructed military fortifications that are able to withstand a modern European military's frontal assault against them. So in combination with good marksmanship, the British are unable to penetrate into these fortifications. So in that sense, you can say that the South African Boers have militarily thought about this and have gone through a quite extensive process of fortifying these positions, and have done so of such a nature that they are able to defeat a European military system in 1880.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel. Excellent
Thank you,
answer too.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So, Jean-Pierre and Professor David de Caizal, thank you once again for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It has a real honor to journey with us through this significant episode in history, the first Anglo-Boer War, 1880 and 1881. To everyone who joined us, thank you for being here and being part of this new episode of Voices of History. We remind you, you can visit our website to learn more about upcoming events, conference, and new installment of this international interview series. We'll see you again soon in the next episode of Voices of History. Thank you very much, and see you in the next international episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre.